Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. On Science Fantastic, we profile the amazing, jaw-dropping scientific discoveries which are revolutionizing our world and touching our lives. And in this hour, we're going to talk about something we touched upon with a previous interview. We're going to be talking about how to create a little Big Bang in your living room. Now, this may sound preposterous, but it's actually something that we physicists have actually seriously done the math for. And with us today is Zia Morali. She has a PhD in theoretical physics from Brown University. And the title of her new book is A Big Bang in a Little Room, The Quest to Create New Universes. So today, we're going to be the ultimate sorcerer's apprentice. We're going to work out the mathematics and details of what it would take in principle to create a baby universe in your own living room. And then the question is, well, if it's possible that someday a physicist in the far, far, far future may be able to create their own Big Bang, then the question is, well, was that how our universe was created 13.8 billion years ago? And so once again, the book is called A Big Bang in a Little Room by Dr. Zia Morali. So Zia, one question that we always leading off with is, how did you as a child, somebody maybe the age of 10, what steered you in the direction of science and eventually theoretical physics?
Oh, well, first of all, let me say thank you so much for inviting me onto your program. I'm a huge fan of yours, so I'm really excited to be with you today.
Okay, and when you were a youth, what steered you in the direction of science and specifically physics?
It's something that I've always been very interested in. My family were not particularly, they were not scientists. But when I was young, I always wanted to know how things worked, where things came from, what were the rules behind, everything we could see around us. And, growing up in London, we didn't really get to see the stars very much, I have to be honest. It's a little bit foggy and it's a little bit rainy here at times. But, every so often, we might go on holiday and then you get to see the dark skies, you get to see the stars and just how beautiful everything is. But there's always this question of, where does it come from and how does it get to be like that?
Okay. And what steered you in the direction of cosmology then?
Well, this is very interesting because cosmology is the study of some of the biggest questions in the universe. So it's not just about asking how things work, but really going back to the beginnings of how our universe came into being. And I think that actually came a little bit later for me. So when I was at school, I was interested in all aspects of science, in biology and, plants and animals, and in physics in terms of how, we throw balls and how they can take projectile motion and, shoot guns and bullets will land in certain places and doing all those sorts of calculations. But when I went to university, what really grabbed me was sort of even bigger questions about the origins of where our universe came from. And I think it was partly the fact that these are such wonderful and yet unexplained, issues that physicists are really sort of struggling to find the answers with, and it was really the cutting edge of research that was happening at the moment. But also, it's very mathematical, and I'm somebody that, I liked doing a lot of sums and things, and so I like to kind of put the two things together. Big questions, and then going away and sitting down and doing calculations to try and work out the answers.
Okay, well, let's get right into the Big Bang, and then later the question is whether or not you can create your own Big Bang in your living room. But first, what do we know about the Big Bang? Explain to us the Big Bang, when it happened and how it happened.
Okay, so, now we've got the Big Bang Theory television program. Everybody is aware of this term and this idea that our universe started out about 13.8 billion years ago from a very, very tiny point of energy, of sort of infinite energy that had sort of infinitely dense mass contained within it. And from this tiny, tiny point or singularity, this kind of exploded outwards and created the universe we see around us. That sort of it expanded over time, it got bigger, and it actually stands as, the beginning of time and space. Before that, as far as conventional physics goes, we don't really, we can't really say what happened before that. Time and space were created 13.8 billion years ago.
Okay, now some people, of course, say, well, how do you prove it? How do you know that this explosion took place? So first of all, tell us a little bit about the microwave background radiation, which some people think is the afterglow, the aftershock of the Big Bang itself that we can measure in the laboratory.
Yeah, that's right. So when you talk about this massive, big explosion outwards, actually, that leaves behind a trace, a sort of a smoking gun. And physicists over the years have sort of pondered what this would look like, and it takes the form of a radiation that pervades the whole universe. It still pervades it today. It's all around us, in fact. It's just most of us aren't really aware of it. And so the question was, well, how could you pick it up? Where would you find it? And it turns out that actually it was discovered almost by accident, really, in the 1960s by radio astronomers who were, doing something totally different, trying to build a sort of antenna, and they had this kind of background hum or this fuzz on it, and they couldn't work out what it was. They thought it was just some kind of terrible noise, or maybe, it was pigeon droppings that were affecting their experiment. But what it actually turned out to be, which they realized, and, thanks to the work of other theoretical physicists who had predicted that this radiation was out there, they realized it was kind of this background hum. It's
okay,
radiation
Morale, we're going to have to take a short commercial break. Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. In this hour, we're going to explore one of the cutting-edge questions of science. What happened before creation? The Bible and many biblical texts talk about a beginning of the universe, but, well, what happened before the beginning? And scientists talk about a Big Bang, an explosion that took place 13.8 billion years ago. But what happened before that? Where did the Big Bang come from? Why did it bang? What banged it to begin with? For those questions, we have to go to something called the quantum theory, which we're going to discuss shortly with a theoretical physicist all the way from London. We have with us on the line Zia Morale. Well, Zia, where we left off, we were talking about this cosmic explosion, but now we have something called inflation. And the Alan Guth, one of the founders of inflation theory, was actually on our airwaves recently. But explain to us, what is inflation? And because it's a quantum event, can inflation happen again and again and again?
Right. So, inflation took place a fraction of a second after the birth of the universe, a fraction of a second after the Big Bang, where theoretical cosmologists think our universe went through a rapid period of expansion. It was growing up faster than the speed of light. And, they've worked out that this probably happened because it explains away some mysteries about the way our universe looks today, about, why different parts of the sky look so very similar when we look at the radiation, the cosmic microwave background that was left over from the Big Bang. And so, this process, this really rapid growth of the universe, it solves a lot of big mysteries about how our universe grew to the size that it is today, during this very brief growth spurt. And it created sort of the energy to give us the particles that grew into galaxies and stars and eventually, people like us.
Now, inflation is a quantum theory, meaning that there's an uncertainty with regards to it, meaning that it could happen again and again and again. And there's a certain probability that it could become, it could happen infinitely number of times. And if that's true, does that mean, therefore, that inflation, which seems to fit the data, necessarily leads us to a multiverse of universes?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and that's something that cosmologists are really thinking a lot about. And at the moment, many of them do think that, yes, this process, this inflation, if it happened once, then actually there's no reason to think that it wouldn't happen again at different parts of the universe. And so what would happen, in effect, was that, at any point in time, somewhere out there, a tiny little point in space could suddenly burst out like a growing balloon, and that point would give rise to another universe, which would be sort of neighboring to ours. And this process can be happening anywhere and everywhere around us, but we would then end up with a number of kind of different parallel neighboring universes, which could each have their own laws and their own physics, and which are sort of disconnected from ours. We can't kind of travel to them. But yes, they could be out there in a multiverse of many, many neighboring universes.
So Einstein gives us a picture that the universe is a bubble of some sort. We don't know the nature of this bubble, but a bubble that's expanding, and we live on the skin of the bubble. And the inflation theory now says that our bubble can give birth to baby bubbles, and in fact, perhaps an infinite number of baby bubbles, which gives us a bubble bath of universes. So perhaps the Big Bang was created by the collision of two universes, or by the budding of a universe into two universes. Is that right?
That's a wonderfully speculative idea, and I've heard all sorts of things like that. I've heard also, the idea that there can be these, bubble universes out there in the multiverse, as you said, and that they could perhaps collide together. And, if we're lucky, we could see evidence of those collisions as kind of scars on the cosmic microwave background, and that would give us evidence of the existence of other universes. And if we're unlucky, then, I hate to say it, but, you could have this kind of crash between universes, and it could destroy our own little corner or our little bubble of the universe. So there are a lot of wild ideas out there of what could happen if these bubbles crash into each other. And I guess, it's something that people are really looking into, because it could have very exciting and interesting, maybe scary consequences.
Okay, now these other universes may not look like our universe. Perhaps a proton is unstable. Perhaps it's nothing but a mist of electrons and neutrinos and subatomic particles. But some of these universes could look very similar to our universes, with stable protons and stable atoms, right? So what you're saying is there could be a multiverse of universes with different laws of physics in each one. Is that right?
That's absolutely right, yes. And that comes out of a theory which I know is very close to your heart, being a string theorist yourself, because I guess string theory, it gives rise to a number of possible ways that the laws of physics could be realized. And so the idea is that maybe, some of these different kinds of collections of laws and particles and forces that are allowed by the rules of string theory could be realized in different versions of these parallel universes. And some of them could be completely different. They could have different dimensions, different forces, different particles. They could be dead and have no kind of life in the way that we understand it. But others could have, life that is very similar to our own. And some physicists even, go as far as saying there could be other versions of ourselves, or people who are so very much like ourselves but only slightly different, other clone versions of ourselves in these parallel universes.
So one question that I often get is Elvis Presley still alive in another parallel universe? Well, I guess you can't rule it out. There's always a finite quantum probability that even outrageous things that we think are fantasy could be realized in another parallel universe. Now, if this continual creation idea is possible, I asked Alan Guth, who is one of the founders of inflation theory, can you actually do this in your living room? That is, if you have a super powerful atom smasher, a particle accelerator much bigger than anything we could even conceive of on the planet Earth, then what would it take? What would it take to create the conditions by which you can cook a baby universe in the laboratory? What are your thoughts? He gave me some numbers. He did the calculation himself. He published a paper on it, in fact. But what are your thoughts about what it would take to cook a baby universe in your living room?
Well, it would take, I know exactly the calculation that you're talking about that Alan Guth did there, because it started me off kind of on this path to writing this book. It would take quite a small mass of a very special type of space that can inflate. Only about 25 grams, I think, is what he calculated back in the 1980s, which makes it sound wonderfully easy. It's not that easy in practice.
Yeah, in fact, I asked him, would it be dangerous to do that? And he says, well, if in a worst case, it might be equivalent to a small atomic bomb. So you would have to get out of the way pretty quick, he said.
Well, going through my book, nobody has said anything quite that dramatic, but the idea would be to take hold of this kind of patch of space. And where would you find that patch of space? Well, some physicists in Japan have theorized that it could take the form of an exotic particle called a monopole that we haven't yet found, but which people are looking for. But you can kind of get this monopole, stick it into a particle accelerator, and fire particles at it at very high energies. Now, this would have to be higher energies than we have currently in the best particle accelerator in the world.
Much higher energies, right? Right. Okay. Well, we have the Large Hadron Collider, so explain to us how that works. And some people think that if I get two colliding beams of subatomic particle and they slam into each other, perhaps you can create maybe a mini black hole or maybe a mini universe. So explain to us this process by which two beams of energy accelerate and then are colliding inside the beam, creating an explosion which some people think may one day create a baby universe. Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. In this hour, we're going to go right to the cutting edge of modern physics and cosmology. Most of us are familiar with the Big Bang, if only as a CBS sitcom on television. But according to Einstein, the universe is a bubble of some sort. We don't know the details of how big this bubble is, but think of a bubble that's expanding, and it's been expanding for 13.8 billion years. But the theory that fits this expansion of the universe is called inflation. Inflation is a quantum theory, meaning that there's a certain probability that the bang could happen again and again and again. So we have a soap bubble of universes, with one bubble perhaps budding off other baby universes. So even as we speak, universes may be created somewhere far, far in the distance. And then the question that Zia Morali asks in her book, A Big Bang in a Little Room, is whether or not an artificial intelligence of some sort, an alien intelligence, would have the capability of creating a baby universe in their laboratory. And this is something that I don't think is going to be possible anytime soon. But, well, the calculation has been done. And so we'll talk about it right now. So, Zia, you mentioned the fact that, yes, Alan Guth did this calculation, but he said that it would take an enormous amount of energy to create this baby universe, right? This is not for the average scientist, and certainly not something you can do in your basement.
No, absolutely. Even at the biggest particle accelerator that we currently have, they haven't quite got the energies to do this there yet. So we're looking at maybe, decades down the line where our accelerators could be getting more and more powerful. And then, even then it's not that simple. You would have to get hold of a special kind of particle that is already primed to inflate in this way. And so one candidate particle that researchers in Japan have sort of suggested could be used in this way is called a monopole. And that's kind of like, when you have a magnet, say your fridge magnet, it has two different poles, a north pole and a south pole. And for a long time, physicists have imagined, due to their theories, that there could be a particle out there which contains only one magnetic pole. And they've been searching for it. So far, they haven't found it, but the theory says that if you could find one of these, this would be like a seed for a baby universe. Now, you would stick stick it into your particle accelerator, a very much more powerful one than we have today, hurl particles at it at very, very high speed. So they're going to transfer a whole load of energy to it when they smash into it. And that energy is going to trigger a very strange process. Now, what will happen is this monopole will start to inflate. Now, that sounds bad because you sort of think if this monopole is going to grow to the size of a universe, then, oh, my goodness, isn't it going to kind of grow out of the particle accelerator and it's going to kind of, destroy our universe?
That would really ruin your day, right? A universe-destroying bubble, right?
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about this expansion.
Like that to happen. But actually, when Alan Guth and other people sat down and did these kinds of calculations, you'll be very pleased to hear that's not what happens. So what actually happens is space-time itself starts to warp because of this monopole, and it in such a way that the monopole grows its own space-time through a wormhole that is connected to our universe. And it sort of pushes out of our space-time, creating its own space and time in parallel to ours. And so in the lab, what do we see? We see a mini black hole. But that mini black hole is actually a gateway to this growing universe, this growing baby universe, that is now expanding and inflating, but in a disconnected space-time to ours.
So in other words, if one bubble starts to bud a baby bubble, the baby bubble bursts from the outside, so it does not affect the bubble on the inside. So we're talking about a baby bubble budding from a larger bubble. Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. In this hour, we're talking about the cutting edge of physics, the point at which physics, as we know it, starts to break down, and we have to use exotic theories like string theory, which is actually what I do for a living. Now, we have with us a theoretical physicist, Zia Morali. She got her PhD in theoretical physics from Brown University, and her book is called A Big Bang in a Little Room, The Quest to Create New Universes. Now, at first, that sounds preposterous to be able to create a baby universe in your living room, but you can actually do the mathematics. The mathematics comes from Einstein. You have to revise it to include something called inflation theory. But inflation means that, yes, perhaps you can bud a baby universe from our bubble universe to create a baby bubble that then expands outward, and thereby creating two universes from one universe. Now, some people say, wait a minute, doesn't this sound like becoming a god? I mean, you are creating a whole universe, a universe that may eventually have people in it, a universe that may eventually have life as we know it. And then what about the ethics of it? I mean, are we morally justified to create a universe with sentient beings in it? So, Zia, tell us a little bit about the moral question of what happens when you can become your own god in a baby universe.
Well, it's such a huge question, and it's one that I wanted to ask everyone who was involved with the project. Do they worry about this when they're sitting down doing the calculations of how to make a universe? You could be talking about, as you say, creating a space where, people or other intelligent life grows, and you have no control over them, so you're not going to be, a very good god to those people. You can't really help them if they're in need. Are you worried about that? And I got all sorts of different replies. So on the kind of positive side, I spoke to philosophers who think very hard about, the idea of creating artificial intelligence, from machines and technology, but also intelligence in computer simulations and intelligence in baby universes. And for them, they sort of said, okay, you could create intelligent life and maybe these people would have a terrible time. But at the same time, there's something inherently good about life. And, intelligent life tends to make its environment better. It tends to, try to make circumstances better. And maybe if we think that life itself is just a good thing, then not only should we not worry about making life, but we should actually feel obliged to make life. But, other people were far more worried. I spoke to somebody else who also had looked into, questions about accidentally creating life in technology. And that got me a little bit worried because, here was somebody who was sort of saying, I think our computers, our laptops, our telephones even, Siri on your iPhone is already displaying kind of aspects of having free will. And people are just not thinking closely enough about the ethics of creating artificial life around us in this universe, and it's something we have to take much more seriously, much faster. And so he was a bit more concerned about, just blithely saying, I could create life in another universe, or I can create artificial intelligence. He thought that was a big moral question.
Okay, now this raises yet an even bigger question, and that is, what about our own universe, the universe that we're familiar with, the universe that we know and love? Was that created by an artificial being that had enormous power to create our universe? So what are your thoughts, not just about us creating a baby universe in your living room, but whether or not our own universe was created by a superintelligence? What are your thoughts?
It's such a wonderful question, and what's really exciting is that there are physicists out there who have been looking for the answer to that, not just in terms of the philosophy or the metaphysics or the theology of thinking about whether our universe was created in somebody else's garage, but actually thinking, is there a scientific way that we could find out if that actually happened? And so what they have been doing is they've been saying, well, how would we know if somebody created our universe and left us a message for us to read? And we spoke a little bit earlier about the cosmic microwave background, which is this radiation that pervades our whole universe today, which, physicists look at to find evidence.
Okay, Zia, we're going to have to take a short commercial break, but after the break, we're going to ask the big question, and the big question is, what about our own universe? Was our own universe designed by somebody else? Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. In this hour, we're going to send your head swimming because we're going to go to the forefront of theoretical physics, which is, well, what I do for a living. With us today is Zia Morali. She has her own PhD in theoretical physics from Brown University, and she's the author of a new book, A Big Bang in a Little Room, The Quest to Create New Universes. So let me sum up. First of all, Einstein gives us a picture that the universe is a bubble of some sort. We live on the skin of the bubble, and the bubble is expanding. The new wrinkle on all this comes from something called inflation, which is a quantum theory. And in quantum theory, things can happen again and again and again. There's always a finite probability. This means that the bang could happen again, which case the bubble can bud baby bubbles and create a bubble bath of baby universes, which collide, which bump into each other, or bud baby universes, and that's the Big Bang, the budding or the collision of universes. And then the question is, if the math is well understood, then can we create our own baby universe? Well, in principle, the answer is yes, but it would take a fantastic amount of energy, cosmological amount of energy, to assemble an atom smasher capable of opening up a rip in the fabric of space and time. So it's not going to happen anytime soon. But then the question is, and here's the ethical question, not that we can't create baby universes of our own, but was our own universe, the universe that we love, was it created by a super being that one day decided to bud a baby universe, and that's where we came from? So, Zia, what are your thoughts?
Right. So, as I say, it's an absolutely huge question, and one thing that physicists have been looking for is signs, actual scientific evidence of, to prove that our universe might have been created by an alien intelligence, a super advanced civilization that made our universe in their back garden. And the way they would look for that is that they would look to the cosmic microwave background radiation, so that leftover radiation from the Big Bang, because that pervades our entire sky. And their reasoning is that if our universe was created by some other superintelligence, that superintelligence could have written a message into the sky, not in English or French or, German or some other language, but in binary code. And it would be kind of encoded in the patterns of light, in the temperature of light in that radiation. And so, this is something that scientists, astronomers have found this radiation. They've measured its temperature very accurately, and they look at these dips and troughs and peaks in the temperature of light. And so the idea is, could they find a message encoded in that? I should say, before you get too excited, as of yet, nobody has found any message from a creator, but I just think it's so exciting that physicists have kind of thought about a way to turn this massive kind of theological, kind of ethical question, metaphysical question into science, where you could look for evidence, go out there, put a telescope out there and try and look for signs for this.
And by the way, if you want to detect radiation from the Big Bang in your living room, you can do this by getting a radio or a TV and putting it between stations, and you get static. Some of that static comes from the Big Bang. A lot of it comes from Jupiter, but a certain fraction of the static that you get in your living room on a radio or a TV set between stations comes from the Big Bang. Now, scientists eventually want to put up LISA into orbit. It is the Laser Interferometry Space Antenna, which will detect gravity waves from the instant of creation in outer space. From that, they hope to get radiation from the instant of the Big Bang, and at that point, the universe is emerging from the womb, and they hope to get evidence of an umbilical cord. An umbilical cord that connects our baby universe to perhaps a mother universe, which would give some credibility to the idea that there is a multiverse of universes. But what you're saying is, like a message in a bottle, what you're saying is that whoever created our universe may have left a message on this radiation saying, well, here I am, I created you guys. But so far we see nothing, right? Nothing in the microwave background radiation. What do we see there?
No. We haven't seen anything yet. I mean, I think the people who are out there looking for that, they were hoping that they might see some kind of coded message about the laws of physics or something like that. And their thinking was that the creator of the universe would say, by the time your civilization has got advanced enough to detect the cosmic microwave background, then you should know enough about the laws of physics that you'd be able to kind of read the equations written in the sky, and you would understand that there's some kind of order there put there by me. But no, sadly, nothing like that has been found.
And I understand that some biologists who I've interviewed on this radio show believe that maybe even in our own DNA, there's a message written in the junk DNA, which comprises most of the DNA in our body, left over perhaps from the people that may have created us. But as you pointed out, so far we see nothing there either. So the people who believe that perhaps there is a creator's message written in the sky or a message written in our DNA, so far they turn up, well, nothing, right?
Yeah, absolutely right. Nothing yet.
And by the way, if you want to see the... Pardon?
And possibly
yes?
They won't find anything ever.
We don't know for sure. But if you want to see this cosmic background radiation, go to nasa.gov, type in, COBE satellite or WMAP, and you can actually see what it looks like. And it does look pretty random. That is, we don't see any regularity that would indicate a life form, sending us a message from creation. Well, Zia, unfortunately, we have run out of time, so thank you so much for being on Science Fantastic.
And thank you for inviting me.